What's happening, players? In today's tutorial, we're going to make our website look a little bit more professional and also fancy up our navigation bar here. As you can see, obviously there's still stuff to be done here, but it's getting there. What's going on, guys? For the beginning of this tutorial, we're just going to start out with Inspector and start messing around with some different things, getting our page looking more professional. As of right now, you can see the text goes from the very left hand side of the browser all the way to the very right. Generally, you won't see that in a website. Generally, there will be some white space over here, and there's a max width that we set for the whole body of our page. So if you go into Inspector and just click on the body element, what we're going to do first is we're going to say the width is 100%, and that's going to be pretty much the exact same how it is now, but we also want to define a max width. So there's going to be a limit where the 100% only goes up to a certain amount of pixels. So as you can see there, already there's a bunch of white space. It's cut our page off about here, and we want to center this throughout our page so the white space is on both sides. So what we're going to do is type out margin, and what margin is, if you can see down here, it just adds some extra space around the element. So what we're going to define is saying, hey, yeah, we don't care about adding space to the top or the bottom of our page. We just want the space to be added to the left and the right. So anytime you use one of these properties, whether it be margin, padding, anything that affects four different sides, like margin left, 120 pixels or something like that, and you can do that for each one of those: margin left, margin top, margin right, margin bottom, and you can define what you want your margin to be. But instead, you can just define all four properties within one line of code here. So it's going to say we're going to define all aspects of the margin. First one that it's going to be defined is, this is going to be for everything. If we only give one property, one parameter within here, it's going to put a margin on the top, bottom, left, and right. If we want just the top and bottom to be the same and the left and the right to be the same, that's going to be two different inputs that we give. So for example, we could do 10 pixels here, and what this is defining is saying, hey, for the top and the bottom, have a margin of 120 pixels. For the left and the right, have a margin of 10 pixels. And we can go even one step further and define three properties. For example, 14 pixels here. So now what we're defining here is saying, hey, the top is going to be, it's always kind of clockwise if you think of it that way. It's saying the top is going to be 120 pixels, and then the left and the right is going to be 12 pixels, and at the bottom it's going to be 14 pixels. And you can kind of see that within this image down here as well. And if we want to define all four sides that have different margins, for example, you could do four different aspects. And again, that's going to be top, right, bottom, and then left. It goes clockwise. So that's an easy way to think about it. Otherwise, you can also do margin dash left, margin right, whatever you want there. But what we actually want is to have a zero margin for the top and the bottom, and we actually want to auto whatever is left. So for in this example, it looks like the auto feature says that, hey, I know your max is 960 pixels. It looks like there's 708 pixels left over. I'm going to split that in half and give it 354 pixels on the left side, 304 pixels on the right side. So if we go back to our page, it looks a lot nicer, and even if we scale down our window a little bit, it's always going to set that auto feature and keep it in the exact center. So that's one way you can center things, by just adding a margin property of auto. And again, margin is just some extra space around our element. So that looks pretty good as well. We might want to copy this over into our code. So again, we're just going to define the body, and generally within these files, you want to keep, you kind of want to keep it in the same format as your HTML. So body was defined first in our HTML, so we want to have it at the top of our page, and we're just going to have a width of 100% of what is available, a max width of 960 pixels. Looks pretty good. And we want to set our auto margin to center it horizontally. So again, 0 pixels on top and bottom, and we want auto for left and right side. So that looks good. Let's go back to our navigation that we were working on last tutorial. And again, we can't really mess around with it until we define all of our links within our CSS, so then we can play around with it in an inspector. So we're going to go back to our CSS file, and we're going to add those links, which will be nav, and then it's a list item, and there's a link within those list items, and that's where we're going to define our style. So the first thing that we want to do, I'm just going to save this and reload our page. So now when we grab this link, we can edit our styles here. The first thing that we want to do is probably have text align center, which it already is, so that's not too big of a deal. Well, let's add a background color to our links as well, so we can actually see what we're working with. And again, background color is just going to be background dash color. Pretty simple to remember. Again, it's just one of those things you have to get familiar with for all these. And I'm sorry that I know I'm just kind of typing this out and not explaining it. I know in the last tutorial we used a float left, and I didn't really explain that, so I apologize. It might be a little bit confusing, but what we did is we said instead of stacking these elements, just float everything to the left. Just keep stacking until you reach the end of the page, and then go to the next line and keep stacking stuff to the left. Don't go up and down for now, just keep pushing things to the left. And since each of those elements were only a width of 1/3, we were able to fit all three on one line of code up here, or on one row. So that's what happened with that. I know I didn't really explain that. Again, we'll be talking about this more throughout the course when we use floats and everything else. Again, right now it's just getting people familiar with how this works. So we've added a background color to our element, and you can see it's just right around the text. So what we want is we want this whole element to be a block display. So we're going to have a display block. So that's just going to say everything here is part of this block. This whole link, everything that's available, it's a block element. I know that's terrible. Once we get into inline and block, that tutorial, I'm going to go over that in more depth. I'll explain what block is in a future tutorial. Don't worry about that. Another thing that we want to do is maybe add some padding, make it a little bit taller. And again, we're going to do something similar with what we did with our margin. We're going to define all the padding for each of these elements, but instead we're just going to give it some top and bottom padding by adding, maybe 10 pixels and then saying 0 pixels for the left and the right. We don't really care about the padding on the left and the right, and it's gonna look a little bit nicer up there. Another thing that we could do is give it a border. Let's do a border of 1 pixel, and this is kind of like when we added the border to our table. You define how thick you want that border to be and what type you want it. You can either say solid or like dotted. As you can see there's some other options, but we're just gonna do a solid. And then we want it to be an off color, and I kind of looked up some colors before this tutorial. Obviously we don't want this blue that's using, so I'm just going to do E0, 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 and that's going to give it a nice darker gray. That's looking pretty good already. Obviously we're going to have to get rid of some of these link styles here, but that's looking pretty good for our navigation so far. Let's make it even better. Let's add a nice little shadow to the back of this navigation. So you do that with something called box shadow, and this will work for most browsers. One thing you might want to check occasionally is if you're developing a very large site. There's a lot of people using like Internet Explorer 6 from back when computers were invented pretty much, and a lot of these things won't work. So if you go into like W3 schools, which I kind of use this as a reference to make these tutorials, but as you can see here, it kind of defines what a box shadow is. You can test it out, and then it'll tell you what type of browsers it works on. So for example, if someone's using Internet Explorer 8, it won't actually look right on Windows Explorer 8. Even though IE 11 is out right now, people still have old stuff. But generally Chrome they'll work on Chrome. That's why a lot of people use Chrome. But that's something to note as well. I know there's a lot of stuff in this tutorial already, so let's go ahead and try this out. Add a quick box shadow. So 10 pixels by 10 pixels black. So again, you can see it just kind of moves it 10 pixels to the left and 10 pixels down, and it's a black. That looks pretty terrible. What we're actually going to do instead is something called inset. So it's going to reverse the shadow. It's going to actually push it up into these links, as you can see here, instead of down along the outside of our links. It's going to be on the inside. So it's just kind of reversing our shadow. But that still looks pretty terrible. Let's try and make this actually look a little bit better. So what we're going to do is we're going to define our inset for 0, 1 pixel, 0, and then just a white. So that'll be just a very light finesse touch. You can't really probably see it yet. But we're also going to set another inset for 0, -1 pixel, 0, and then this is going to be DA color, and also we're going to do 0 or comma 0 0 15 pixels, and we're going to have an RGB A value. This is red, green, blue, and alpha. So we're going to define that as having a 0 0 0 and then just like a 0.7 for alpha. And that looks like actually way too much. Let's make that more subtle with a 0.07, and that just gives it a nice little glow to it. Already our website's looking pretty sweet with that up there. Again, we might change this out to have some images or a better text and get rid of this text decoration. In the next tutorial, we're going to learn about hovering over links and changing the style when different things are happening. Whether you're hovering over or clicking, we're going to change the style of that. So hopefully we're getting a little bit more familiar with CSS. Again, a lot of this stuff you might not recognize, but Google makes it really helpful when you're developing there. They'll say, hey, this is what a margin is. It's padding on the outside of this. Here's your border. Here's some inner padding, but padding is innerward. Margin is kind of outerward. So we're already kind of seeing a lot of things come into play, and we're starting to learn what these things actually mean. We also know that we can stylize things differently by how many things that we're defining. And again, generally it goes top, right, bottom, left. So like a clock. I know that's kind of again, just a monkey see, monkey do tutorial, but I just want to show you a lot of different things throughout this course so you can kind of see what they do. We'll get into some more theory about, again, like blocks or having something inline and what that all means. So guys, thanks again for watching, and please subscribe, please share these videos. I definitely appreciate it. Like the videos and do something cool today too. Don't sit at the computer all day. So see you guys later, and have a great rest of your day.